Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever and whenever you're tuning in from. We are so glad you're here with us at Advocacy Summit. I'm Jordan Teague, Interim Co-Director of Policy Analysis and Coalition Building here at Bread for the World. As you've heard, our theme this year is Invest in Children, Transform the Future. At Bread, we really believe that. We believe that we must invest in the nutrition and well-being of our children to have the future that we envision of a world without hunger, where every person can live the life that God longs for them to live, one with dignity and good health. As people of faith, we recognize that the world we live in is not yet what we long for it to be. And that's why we're here, is it not? Because we believe that we can make change. The change that we're focused on this year is making sure that women and children can get the right nutrition at the right time to help them thrive in this world. We are particularly focused today on the 1,000-day window, that critical period between a woman's pregnancy and her child's second birthday. If you've been with us at Bread for really any length of time, you're familiar with the 1,000 days, especially when we're talking about global nutrition. But did you know the 1,000 days matters everywhere? Pregnancy and the time until a child's second birthday are the most critical for getting the right nutrition, laying the foundation for the rest of women and children's lives. It does not matter where you live or where you are born. Getting the right nutrition during that period is critical, not only for survival, but to make sure women and children can thrive. So what are some examples of this? All right, let's start with women. Anemia, a common form of malnutrition, is a common condition among women, and it's also a major contributor to women's deaths during childbirth around the world. Even in our country, the rate of anemia among Black and Hispanic women is nearly twice that of white women. Likely a major factor in why women of color die during childbirth at least twice the rate of white women in our country. Now, there's obviously a lot that needs to happen to address this disparity and ensure that women everywhere have access to the right nutrition during their formative years and their pregnancies. One pretty small step is making sure all women have access to prenatal vitamins, especially the ones that contain iron. Some studies have shown that globally, access to iron folate supplements could reduce maternal mortality by nearly 1/5. Imagine the impact that could have on women and their children. Once a child is born, breastfeeding, breast milk is the life source for their nutrition. Yet just 2 in every 5 children are exclusively breastfed during infancy. Not even half of children. And breast milk is the one-stop shop that provides the nutrition that protects children from many diseases, which they'd be more vulnerable to without breastfeeding. And especially in low and middle income countries, these diseases tragically kill many children before their 5th birthdays. But as important as survival is, good nutrition also helps kids thrive. And what do we mean by thrive? There's good evidence that good nutrition, breast milk, a healthy, diverse diet when they're growing up, helps children's bodies and brains develop. Okay, so we know that nutrition in the 1,000 days is important everywhere. How do we get there? Let's start in our own country. In the United States, we have safety net programs, including SNAP and WIC that many of you are familiar with. Studies show again and again that these programs are important for addressing hunger and malnutrition, including and especially for women and children in the 1,000 days. But we also know that most families' SNAP benefits do not last the entire month, and participation in WIC drops by 1/4 during the 1,000 days. That is why Bread is advocating for a more comprehensive 1,000 days infrastructure plan to strengthen the impact of SNAP and WIC and make sure women and children in our country can get the right nutrition at the right time. We want our government to support maternal and child nutrition through the SNAP and WIC programs. We want access to quality, comprehensive health care through Medicaid coverage during the 1,000 days. We want paid leave in our country to support women workers. We want childcare and early education that are affordable and quality for families. And we want permanent expansion of the child tax credit that many of you fought so hard earlier this year to get. This is the 1,000-day infrastructure that we need to fight back the effects of the pandemic on nutrition of women and children, and to make sure our country provides women and children what they need to live healthy and dignified lives. But at Bread, we also believe it is moral and just to invest in the nutrition of women and children in other and lower income countries. So we're also advocating for more and better foreign assistance focused on maternal and child nutrition. We want our government to double its funding for global nutrition because we know that nutrition programs like breastfeeding support, prenatal vitamins, vitamin A supplements, and getting severely malnourished children the treatment they need are effective to improve maternal and child nutrition. We also know that countries themselves are committed to improving the nutrition of their women and children, but due to a wide range of factors, not least global inequity and the ongoing impacts of the history of colonialism, many countries could use extra financial support to reach women and children with the right nutrition during the 1,000 days. Our faith calls us to have compassion and stand alongside women and children in our country and around the world. And our conviction urges us to call on our nation's leaders to demonstrate a spirit of generosity, hospitality, and moral leadership by making the necessary investments to create the best 1,000 days for every woman and child, no matter where they are. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We are so glad you're here. And I am so excited. I have the privilege of handing you off to Reverend Eugene Cho, who will be in conversation with some of our Bread staff and extended Bread family. They're going to talk to you about what the 1,000 days means to them and what we can do as advocates, as Bread for the World, to make a better 1,000 days for women and children in our country and around the world. Thank you.
Hey everyone, this is Eugene Cho, President at Bread for the World, and it is my joy again to invite you and to welcome you to this particular conversation. You just heard Jordan give us a great framework about the significance of 1,000 days, and now we're going to be inviting additional Bread staff and family to tell us more about what 1,000 days means to them. It's not just important work that we do, but this is important for us in a personal way as well. So I'm here now with two of our all-star staff. Nicole Schmidt is our state organizer for Ohio and Michigan. Just the fact that she works with these two states signifies that that's holy work. If you know how much rivalry exists between Ohio and Michigan. She's been with Bread for almost 5 years. And Sergio Mata-Cisneros is a domestic policy analyst in our government relations department. And he's been with us for just over a year. Nicole and Sergio, part of our team, working on building out what a better 1,000 days could look like in the United States and how policy should change to make that happen. I've had the privilege of hearing some of their stories in person, and I'm so grateful that you'll get a chance to hear from them as well. So, Nicole and Sergio, welcome. We're so glad that you're here with us. Nicole, we're going to begin with you. If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself to our audience and tell us why 1,000 days is important to you.
Thank you, Eugene. Yes, so again, I'm Nicole Schmidt, and I'm the Ohio organizer with Bread for the World in Ohio and Michigan. And the 1,000 days is deeply personal to me because as a mom, I really understand how critical those 1,000 days are to a child's development. I have 4 children, 2 by birth and 2 were adopted internationally. And my children that were adopted internationally really experienced some severe malnourishment in their early years. They joined our family when they were 5 and 10 years old from Ethiopia. So we really understand on a personal level the effects of not investing in early childhood nutrition and the long-term effects of that.
Nicole, I know we're going to speak more, but for now, thank you so much for just giving a glimpse of your story. Sergio, same question to you. Tell us about yourself and why the 1,000 days matters to you.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Sergio. I work in the government relations team here at Bread for the World in domestic policy, and I'm excited to talk to you all about why I care about the first 1,000 days of a child's life. You know, this is the most critical period of human development, and investing in children during this crucial period yields to lifelong returns. You know, physical and intellectual setbacks during this time, you know, lead to lifelong health and other problems. And this is why, you know, some of the world's leading economists have called for more significant investment in nutrition and well-being of mothers and infants and toddlers during this 1,000-day period.
Sergio, thanks for sharing that, because I think we need to amplify that message. This is not a bread thing. It's not just a partisan issue. This is a conversation, science-backed, where leading scientists and economists have said that the first 1,000 days is such a significant part of the future flourishing of a human life. So thanks again for framing it in that way. Sergio, I want to come back to you as well. Earlier this year, Bread for the World, we won a major victory in expanding the child tax credit. Now, I also know that the child tax credit is also personal for you. And before we speak more about why CTC matters, how is it personal for you?
Yes, so thank you to all of those that sent emails to your members of Congress or made phone calls. So Congress earlier this year passed a major COVID relief bill known as the American Rescue Plan that included a historic 1-year expansion of the child tax credit. This expansion of the child tax credit has the potential to cut child poverty nearly in half around the country and advance racial equity significantly. Also, it could do more to reduce hunger and poverty among our nation's children than any single policy has in decades. And, you know, this expansion of the child tax credit is great, and we're really happy that it happened. But I, growing up, benefited from the previous version of the child tax credit. So it helped families like me during, I grew up in a single parent household, and my mom had multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. And, you know, receiving the child tax credit during tax season was huge, because this is when we got a large lump of money and we were able to invest in different things that we weren't able to during the year. One of the major drawbacks of receiving the money at a one lump sum is that, you know, we were not able to divide it up to use it throughout the year. So we only used it to buy major purchases, which was great. But if we would have had the payment divided up monthly, then we would have been able to use it to, you know, buy food or to pay for rent. So here's the good news. this historic expansion of the child tax credit increased the amount from $2,000 to $3,600 for children under 6 and $3,000 for children 6 to 17. And it's going to divide the credit monthly, so giving people the opportunity that they don't have to wait until tax time to access a credit. Instead, beginning this July, families all over the country are going to start receiving for each child, they're going to receive $300 or $250. And this is going to be huge for families like me, like mine. I still have an younger sister who's 13 years old. So she's gonna benefit from this credit, and receiving these monthly payments are gonna be huge. My mom still works 2 jobs, and receiving this extra flow of cash starting this month, it's going to be huge, because now she can, maybe doesn't have to work that second job and is able to spend more time with my sister. So another thing that, it was included in the expansion of the child tax credit is that it's making it available to families with 0 to middle income status. So before, you had to have some income in order to access the credit. So this is a huge win. Because now low-income families like mine, who receive less than the amount they previously did, are now going to be able to receive the full amount of the child tax credit.
Sergio, thank you. There was a lot of information that you shared, and I know that more information is available on our website for those that want to learn more and to partner with us. But I really want to amplify one of the things that you shared, because I think it's so critical. You shared that the CTC, when expanded, has the potential to reduce child poverty in half. Can you confirm that for me? Yes.
So that is correct. It can cut child poverty. It can nearly in half this historic expansion.
Okay. So this is the reason why so many experts are saying that this is one of the most transformative legislation that has come through the halls of Congress. And that's the reason why Bread for the World, we're talking about this so much. So again, thank you. We know that getting the right nutrition during the 1,000 days is critical to the health and well-being of children and women. Absolutely essential. One of the policies Bread is focusing on, as Jordan explained earlier, is paid leave. And that might seem odd for some, but we want to make sure that we connect the dots for you between these two things. So Nicole, back to you. Can you explain to us why Bread thinks paid leave is important for child nutrition?
Sure. Again, this is a really personal issue for me. When I got pregnant with my oldest son, Aiden, I qualified for WIC. And I can't say enough about how supportive that program was for my family during that early time period of my first pregnancy. I learned so much about child development, and I learned so much about the benefits of exclusively breastfeeding my child for 6 months. And I came away from that experience so excited and really wanting to give my child that head start in life. But my place of employment was a really hostile one. I quickly realized that they were not happy that I was pregnant, and they certainly weren't going to offer any accommodations for breastfeeding. And I later realized that I didn't have any paid leave. So I'd learned all this great information. I'd gotten really excited about breastfeeding my child because of the WIC program. And then I quickly figured out that it was going to be nearly impossible for me to do that. I felt stuck, and I felt like I didn't have any good options in that moment. So my husband and I, we took some time and we prayed about it. And we decided that the best thing for me to do at that time, in order to give our child that head start, was to leave the workforce. And what that meant for us was that my husband had to pick up extra shifts. We struggled a little bit more. And a lot of other families simply don't have that privilege. It's not an option for them to step out of the workforce. And so they're left to struggle with those choices. I know that families it's pretty universal that families need that time during the 1,000 days to bond with their children, to breastfeed if that's what they choose to do. And paid leave really makes that an option for so many families. Not having access to paid leave really undermined all of the things that I had learned through the WIC program.
That's great. Well, thank you. And I want to clarify a couple things. Number one, you talked about a hostile work environment. Folks, for those that are watching, she was not at Bread for the World at that time. I want to make that clarification. And Nicole, I mean, you shared a little bit about your family story and, you know, when your son was born and a year old. And how old is he now, if you don't mind me asking?
So Aiden is 18. He just had his 18th birthday in April of this year.
Okay. 18 years old. I think I recently heard that you and your husband are celebrating your 20th anniversary. And so the assistance that you received contributed to the flourishing of your son, your family. And that's, again, so important because we as parents, all we desire is for our children to experience flourishing in their lives. I want to continue our conversation. Paid leave is also an important policy when it comes to making sure families can use a really important program for the 1,000 days. And I'm speaking about WIC. Sergio, can you help us, again, understand this a little better?
Yes. So for some context about, paid leave, the United States is the only high-income country that doesn't guarantee workers paid leave to welcome a new child, attend to serious health problems, or care for a loved one. So I just want that to, for people to sit that in, for people to just, that comment that I just made, we're one of the only high-income countries that doesn't guarantee the people the time off to care for their children, during this critical time period. And, here at Bread for the World, we believe that no person should be confronted with the possible choice between their health, the well-being of their families, or their economic security. So that's why we are urging, that, paid family leave is so critical to the 1,000 days and so critical during this time period that people have access to it. I quickly just want to share a quick stat. So just over 1/5 of workers have access to paid family leave through their employers, and only 40% have access to paid medical leave. So, Medicaid and WIC provide valuable support for breastfeeding, but the absence of a national paid leave policy undercuts all these efforts. So we invest all this money into these programs and educating people, and if there's not a national paid leave policy, people have to return back to work and they're in a tough situation because, they're not guaranteed this time off. Also, one of the things that the way we can strengthen WIC is that families who are eligible for WIC and Medicaid, don't have to go back to recertify. During the first 1,000 days, people should sign up for the program and be enrolled throughout that time so that, this increases the retention in these programs that are so crucial to child nutrition.
Sergio, thank you. I know that's a lot of information again, and I really appreciate you helping us get a better grasp of some of those details. Nicole, if I can just come back to you. We've heard now some of your story. Thanks again to you and Sergio for being vulnerable. As you look back and as you're helping other families and other mothers and other children, what else would have been helpful for you as you look back when you were in your 1,000 days to make sure that you and your child had the best nutrition?
That's a good question. There's a few things that come to mind. As my son grew, I really had the desire to return to the workforce. I enjoyed working and I wanted to be out there, working and interacting with the public. And we started to price childcare options and quickly realized that the math just didn't work for our family. We could not afford for me to actually go back to work unless I was making a really significant wage. And even then, it still really felt like I was working basically to pay for childcare, which is very discouraging. And I look back on that time now, my son's 18, and I am really thankful for that time that I got to spend with him in those early years and watching him grow and watching him develop. But the thing that really stands out most to me from that time period was just this feeling of constantly treading water. I just remember us feeling stressed and worried all the time, just praying that none of us would get sick or have a major emergency that would just push us over the edge financially. And it was a constant fear. So my son's 18 now, and our circumstances have changed, and I'm very thankful for that. But I meet families every day in my work with Bread that are in that exact same situation, that are struggling and trying to make these hard decisions for their families. And these choices, without things like paid leave, without things like affordable childcare, just feel insurmountable to the families that I meet. These families want the absolute best for their children, just like I wanted the absolute best for my child. And we know that there's a better way. Sergio's laid out kind of all of the policy components and the things that we feel families need to be successful in those 1,000 days. We've figured this stuff out. We just have to make the investment. And those programs really helped my family succeed. WIC helped my family. And I think if I had had access to affordable childcare during that time, I would have felt like I had more choices. And I don't think that people often realize how important and how much dignity there is in just simply having a choice.
Amen. Thank you so much, Nicole, Sergio, both of you, for being so vulnerable, sharing your stories. And for me, and this really matters because it's a reminder that for all of us, this isn't just a gig. It's not just a job, but we bring our full selves, including our stories. Each of us have benefited from certain programs, including myself with WIC when I was a young father many, many years ago. And so it really does inform the work that we do. So thank you for bringing your full selves to this. For those that are watching, thank you so much for staying with us. The good news is that we're actually not done. There's more work to be done. And coming up next, we have some additional folks from our Bread family who are going to talk with us about making 1,000 days better for women and children, not just in the United States, but also around the world. Our mission at Bread for the World is to help end hunger both in the United States and all around the world. It's a very important conversation. So see you very soon. Thank you so much. Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm here now with some of our extended Bread family, Asma, Lateef, and Emira Woods. Now, Asma Lateef is the former director of Bread for the World Institute. As you all know, she was with us for going on 20 years. We miss you so much, Asma, and I genuinely mean that. She is now the policy and advocacy lead for agriculture at the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. Also with us is our special guest, Emira Woods, Senior Advisor with Shine and Associate Fellow at Institute for Policy Studies. Emira has been deeply involved with Bread for the World's Pan-African Women of Faith movement, led by our colleague, Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith. Asma and Emira are going to help us understand what a better 1,000 days could look like for women and children in countries other than our own, and what we need to do to help that happen. So welcome, Asma and Emira. Thank you again so much for joining us. So let's
Honored to be
begin.
with you.
We don't have a live audience to give us a thunderous applause. So just imagine applause in the background. But Asma, if I can, let's start with you. Tell us more about yourself. And for those of us who don't know you, why the 1,000 days is important to you.
Thank you very much, Eugene, and thanks very much for inviting me to join this. So I was born in India, grew up primarily in the US, but spent most of my summers visiting my grandparents in India. And then during those pivotal years of 9th and 10th grade, I lived in Sri Lanka. My father was posted there for his work. And so my childhood experiences really shaped my worldview and the issues that I wanted to work on. I was so conscious that, it's an accident of birth, that you are born into a family that has the means and the resources to really nurture and help children thrive. And I was very conscious of how blessed and lucky I was. And I really wanted to make sure that all children had that opportunity and that it wouldn't be accidental that you are in that situation. So that's been, that really drove my career trajectory and got me interested in issues around hunger, poverty, social justice, economic development. My time at Bread introduced me to the role of advocacy in building the political will to end hunger, to end injustice, and to lift people out of poverty, and the role that policies in particular can have for a very large scale, at a very large scale, to reach large populations. So now with my role at the SDG 2 Advocacy Hub, I'm doing that advocacy much more at the global level. But when I was at Bread, obviously working very much to influence US government policies. The 1,000 days. My life changed in 2008 when the British Medical Journal came out with a series of articles on maternal child malnutrition. I had already been working at Bread for the World for quite a while and focused very much on hunger, but hadn't quite thought about the importance of the type of nutrients. We were quite focused on making sure people had access to food, but we weren't giving as much attention to the types of food people were getting. And the Lancet series really just changed the way I thought about our work and our mission. As a mother, I was quite conscious of how important good nutrition was to me when I was pregnant and to my growing child. And then, for my children, I was aware that nutrition was really good for cognitive and physical development for their health. But what the Lancet series really helped me understand was that malnutrition, particularly in that 1,000-day window between a woman's pregnancy and her child's second birthday, does irreversible damage. And you cannot get that time back. And so it's really critical to invest in good nutrition at that period of time. The other thing that became much clearer to me is that even short bouts of malnutrition in that 1,000-day window can have very long-term consequences on a child's ability to grow properly, to be healthy as an adult, and their physical and cognitive development. And so, we're in the middle of this COVID crisis. We know that hunger is rising, malnutrition is rising. And if you think about the pregnant women and the children under the age of 2 right now, even short bouts that they may not be able to get the right nutrients for a few months could affect their ability to learn, could affect their lifelong earning potential. And if you think about countries that have very high levels, large populations that suffer from malnutrition, we know that almost 1 in 5 children around the world is malnourished. If you think about countries that have a high burden of malnutrition, that, it goes from being an individual problem to a community challenge to an economic challenge for those countries. And so for us, as we were in 2008, as we were processing what the Lancet was telling us, it really did affect our approach to thinking about hunger.
Asma, thank you so much. I know that journey began with you in 2008. It happened a little later for me, just to realize how transformative those 1,000 days are. So thank you for explaining that to us. Emira, same question to you. Tell us about yourself and why the 1,000 days matters to you specifically.
Well, it's such an honor to be with you. So thank you very much for including me in this discussion. It's always a joy also to be with Asma. It feels like kindred spirits. But me, I'm from Liberia. I grew up between really Liberia and upstate New York. And I will always say, I spent the winters in upstate New York where it's cold, and then rainy season in Liberia. But it gave me a sense of 1 foot on each side of the Atlantic. And I feel like that has really carried me throughout my life. So social justice, issues of equity, fighting for the rights of women and children, it feels like it's been woven in my DNA. For me, it's often our foremothers, but it was my great-grandmother. She was an herbalist. She was a midwife, basically, in a very rural area of Liberia, bringing children into the world and understanding how important nutrition and good nutrition was for those early years. My grandmother, her daughter, my grandmother, she was a school teacher. And it's amazing when you think about it. I think of myself as an environmental activist, and my grandmother planted a tree for each child that was born. When they were born, a tree was planted, and it was often a tree that would bear fruit. So it's just thinking from when the child is born, what is needed to sustain that life and also to sustain the planet. This was very much a part of our traditional practice. So I see my grandmother as not just a school teacher, but a community leader and a woman of faith, an icon for many of us. And then my mother, carrying forth that tradition. She's a retired nurse. She worked most of her life in labor and delivery, understanding that moment of birth, how important that is to bring forth a child into the world in a healthy state, in a healthy way. And my father, he was an OBGYN dedicated to women's reproductive rights and women's reproductive health, not only in Liberia, but throughout the region. So I remember early days going with my father to patients' homes, and many of those patients, they didn't have, cash to pay, right? But they would pay, they would give in kind. They would, for his treatment, they would give a chicken or vegetables that they grew in their garden. They gave from what they had. And you see all around the importance of nutrition, of what is grown in the community, shared among those in the community and shared with others, and even traded for goods. I feel like it's such an incredible honor and blessing to see yet another generation. I am blessed with twin daughters, and both of them are doulas committed to helping Black and Brown women bring healthy babies into the world. So for generations, it feels like we've known that, it's those early stages of life that are critical, the first 1,000 days, from pregnancy through the second birthday, vital. It is make or break for the health and well-being of the child, of the mother, of the family, of the community, and really, quite frankly, the entire nation and the world. So it's vital. And you said I should speak about myself. I think of myself as intersectional before I even knew the term from our feminist colleagues. But looking at ways in which we connect the dots, looking for opportunities where we can advocate for broad systemic change, understanding that it is structures of oppression that are global, yet they disproportionately impact communities of color, leaving communities often without access to healthy foods, locally grown foods, without access to healthcare, without proper, well-rounded education that promotes citizenry and promotes care for one's community and one's planet. All of this, I think, is why we come at advocacy, from an intersectional approach. And my day-to-day job, it's in philanthropy and finance. And as Asma talked about the SDG 2, I feel like I spent a lot of time around SDG 7, which is around clean energy and modern energy and making sure that energy is available for all, wherever they may be on this planet. So I focus a lot of my day-to-day on community scale clean energy for parts of the world without access to energy, to make sure that we're able to elevate the importance of particularly solar and community scale wind for women, for small farmers, also for faith and values driven investors who want to protect human health and well-being while also thinking about the needs of future generations. So, we come to this at a time of COVID, at a time when the world is really recognizing that pandemics are with us and how vital it is that we have access to good, healthy foods to sustain us. But without that healthy foods in those first 1,000 days, children really cannot have a healthy start to life. Communities cannot reach their full potential, and really the world will be in a much more dangerous place. So thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation today.
Wow. Thank you to both of you. I feel like we can end right now, and that would be worth the entire session. That was, both of you, so rich, so personal, and thank you for connecting the dots between both personal stories and data and science and the reality of these challenges. Emira, you talked a little bit about the intersectionality of some of our systemic structural justice, and particularly around Black and Brown neighbors in our nation and around the world. So maybe we can dig into that just a little bit more. From a Pan-African perspective, why is it important that the US government prioritize investments in nutrition during the 1,000 days?
I think it is vital for the US government to prioritize investment in human security, human needs. When we think about how our tax dollars are spent, so, a disproportionate amount goes to war and militarism, right? We've got to begin to shift the balance away from sort of a defense architecture to really a human needs. And I think in the midst of this COVID pandemic, we're reminded how vital it is to put human needs first, to make sure that that everyone, wherever they may be on the planet, whether they're in Southeast here in Washington, D.C., or Liberia, or India, or Sri Lanka, wherever they may be in this planet, that they have access to life-saving, right now, it's vaccines, right? But even before the vaccines, we need life-saving food that will be nutritious, that will be life-affirming, and will create a healthy start, not only for children, but for their mothers and their communities around the world. So, so I think we have the example in too many communities of food deserts. We have also climate change disproportionately impacting Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities around the planet. And we recognize that with climate change, there are more and more pressures on land that will make it quite difficult, and pressures on water that make water scarce and much more difficult to access. And in addition, you still have harmful fossil fuel extraction, whether it's oil or gas or mining, that is not only grabbing land, ancestral land from communities, but also leaving so much destruction, including, in places like the Niger Delta or Chad, or the list is so long of places where, the oil spills are like a daily reality. Oil spills in riverways where people are farming, drinking, and bathing. So I think we've got to say, like, as a human family, we've got to shift our priorities towards protecting people and the needs of human beings, but also protecting the planet and the biodiversity that's needed to sustain life for now and for future generations. So what do we need? We need investments. We need investments in that infrastructure that will bring community-based agriculture. Small-scale farmers are the lifeblood of communities that want to access healthy foods. It is those small-scale farmers that are growing, often using traditional seeds that are much more nutritious than any genetically modified seeds may be. So it is creating a space where those small-scale farmers are able to actually grow food. What we have seen throughout COVID, it is Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities that have faced the most disruptions with foods being imported from different parts of the world. Now is the time to think about how we build forward better, right? Like, how do we build systems that will sustain life? Make sure that small farmers, women farmers, have access to growing foods through agroecology on their lands, that are able to produce healthy foods, nutritious foods for children, for the communities now and into the future. So it's a matter of choice. Where do we want our tax dollars to go? And I think for many of us, people of conscience around the planet, including the Bread for the World family, we put the human needs first. That means we put first the opportunity for people to grow their food, to feed healthy local foods to their families, particularly to children in that first 1,000 days.
Amen and amen. Now I feel like I'm at a revival or something, but that was, again, so thankful for that. Asma, back to you. Not only were you director of the Institute for many years, but you are deeply involved in a global movement for nutrition, specifically something called Scaling Up for Nutrition movement. So maybe you could educate those who are joining us what that is and why you're such a big proponent of the Sun movement.
Thank you very much, Eugene, for that question. Yes, the Scaling Up Nutrition movement really came out of the actionable recommendations that were in the Lancet series that I mentioned earlier. So the Lancet series, one of the most hopeful things about that was it provided evidence-based solutions for that could be scaled up pretty rapidly to address maternal-child undernutrition. And so the Scaling Up Nutrition movement really brought together a group of people working across sectors to say, we have these solutions, what can we do about them? And how do we make sure that we are mobilizing the resources and the attention and the action that we need? So the Sun movement was born right out of that. effort. It's now 11 years old. 63 countries have now signed up to the Sun Movement, and including all the countries that have a high burden of malnutrition. And then there are 4 networks that support those countries. One is a civil society network, there's a business network, there's a UN network of all the UN agencies, and then there's a donor network, so of countries, donor countries that are supporting the Sun countries. Bread got involved quite early in the process. So when in the discussions around what should we do with the Lancet findings, we were part of those conversations, and during the summer of 2010, we were part of the task. I was representing civil society on the task force that proposed and established the Sun Movement, and then we held a couple of really big and important meetings early on in the life of the Sun Movement to really engage civil society actors in some of the high burden countries, raise awareness about the Sun Movement and about the Lancet evidence and about the crisis of malnutrition in that 1,000-day window. And so Bread helped launch the civil society network of the Sun Movement in 2013 here in Washington. And so we've had a long history with the Sun Movement. It's now entering its third strategy, its third phase. The first 2, 5-year strategies are done, and now we're in this third phase, which is really about making sure that countries are supported and have the capacity really to implement the programs and to reach the communities most in need. So putting really the countries in the driver's seat in this next phase of Sun.
You spoke about other countries and putting them in the driver's seat, and I think this is so important. I'm reminded even right now about the Nigerian novelist, the brilliant Nigerian novelist, Chimamanda Adichie Ngozi, when she talks about the danger of the single story. And, I've lived the majority of my life in the United States. And sometimes there's kind of this savior complex where we think we're at the center of so much, and we're not and should not be the main driver of a better 1,000 days in other countries. It's a global responsibilities. So Asma, I want to come back to you and just ask if you could just tell us what you've seen that other countries are doing for their own women and children to make a better 1,000 days. What can we learn from other countries?
It's such an important point that you make. The people who are working the hardest for their own food security and to nourish their children are the people in the communities in the hardest hit countries. They are working day in and day out to take care of their families, to take care of their neighbors. And we are, I think the role for us is really to support those people. One of the most exciting things I think about the Sun Movement is how countries have really seized on this information. They have understood that investing in nutrition is vital to their long-term development, their long-term economic prosperity, and equitable growth within those countries. It's in the first few years of this Sun Movement, the first year, we thought, it would be great if a few countries signed up to this. By the end of the first year, I remember having conversations. We were just amazed at how many countries wanted to join the Sun Movement because, again, like the light bulb went off in our minds at Bread around the evidence, I think it really struck a chord, especially with decision makers at the highest level in some of the the Sun country governments. So to join the Sun movement, a country has to commit to a high level of political leadership and support for nutrition. So in many of these countries, it's the president's office, the vice president's office, that is leading the country's efforts. They have to develop a multi-sectoral nutrition strategy. So one of the things that the Lancet showed is there isn't one sector that really will, there's no magic bullet for nutrition. You have to have agricultural interventions, you have to have health, you have to have gender equity, you have to have water and sanitation. Nutrition depends on a lot of things working well. So a lot of these countries have developed these multi-sectoral nutrition plans. And then another condition of the Sun movement is you have to work across stakeholders. So you have to work with civil society, private sector, in order to really have a whole of society approach to this problem. Every stakeholder brings a different lens to the problem. And each country is different and has challenges that are unique. And the National Nutrition Plan can really help set priorities and target resources most effectively. And there's some really amazing examples of national leadership. In Peru, for example, we've seen a dramatic reduction in stunting because the successive governments have prioritized this issue. Rwanda recently set a really ambitious target to halve the stunting rate in just a matter of 5 years, between 2017 and 2024. That's a little more than 5 years, but still a very ambitious target. And then the Prime Minister of Pakistan, in his inaugural address to the nation, held up a picture, an MRI image of a child whose brain had been damaged by malnutrition, as highlighting how important this issue is to his country's development. So countries are clearly understanding how foundational nutrition is to their future.
You know, I had never heard that story about the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and you just sharing that, it just reminded me so much of what Emira shared earlier, that it's not just a personal issue, it changes and impacts the entire nation. And just to have a prime minister highlight that in an address is so powerful and significant. I think we've all seen now the really severe impact that the COVID-19 pandemic is having on global maternal and child malnutrition. Emira, I want to come back to you. Your home country, Liberia, went through a major crisis a few years ago with the Ebola epidemic, which we could argue was a precursor to what we're now seeing globally with the COVID-19 pandemic currently. Can you tell us from your perspective what lessons your country learned in regards to protecting the 1,000 days during crises like epidemics or pandemics that we not just could, but maybe must apply to today's crisis?
You know, this is, thank you so much for this question, because I think it's just a reminder that pandemics are with us, and with this climate crisis that we're in, there will be more pandemics, and they're likely, you know, all the scientists are saying that they will be even worse in the not too distant future. So I think we're just, we have to recognize that this is a new normal, as sad and hard as that is to acknowledge. And, you know, in so doing, again, regardless of the community, health and well-being starts with good, nutritious, locally sourced food. So in the midst of the Ebola crisis, yeah, you know, a key problem was accessing food. Accessing food when it was difficult for people to go out and farm. to make sure that people had food to basically sustain them, to be able to get the treatment that they were needed. So, so the lesson is community saves us all. Coming together and doing that kind of mutual aid is vital. But the mutual aid and the mutual care starts with locally sourced food. I think the other key lesson is that none of us are safe unless all of us are safe. And it's got to start with mothers and children. I think the third lesson is that there's been a disproportionate impact on those who were already in a precarious situation in terms of their economic well-being, in terms of their access to healthcare, in terms of comorbidities, right? Whether it's diabetes or high blood pressure. So what we have seen is that areas that had insufficient access to healthy foods are really the same areas where the pandemic has had its most devastating impact. And so, it is, again, quite frankly, Black, Brown, Indigenous communities that are most at risk. What we have seen is that, particularly with COVID, that the prevalence rate is higher in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, that whether it's Brazil, the United States, or we see now in the Afro-Colombian community, and this recent third wave throughout the African continent, we've seen India and, quite frankly, wave after wave of not only the pandemic, but then these, these other now related infections that are occurring throughout India. It's communities that were already at the brink of sustenance that are finding that the COVID impacts are much more devastating. And so the lives lost in those communities are higher. The access to vaccines is lower. And so the concern is that not only with this current pandemic and all of the various variants of the COVID-19, but future pandemics will continue to ravage communities where you don't have the right infrastructure for healthy societies. So that infrastructure starts with small farmers, starts with protecting local land, protecting traditional seeds. It starts there. Small farmers, women farmers, Black, Brown, Indigenous farmers, they sustain life. So we've got to make sure that policies, whether it's the US government, the UN international bodies, that policies put those communities first. That we talk about issues of equity in ways that we're sure that those communities continue to have access to land, first of all, to be able to have access to grow healthy foods in sustainable ways. This is why we hold up agroecology and those that are using, sort of traditional seeds and using less pesticides that are fossil fuel based, right? Because the pesticides, the fertilizers, they need oil to be able to produce them, right? So to move towards communities that are growing sustainable foods in ways that are healthy, not only for women and children and communities, but also for the planet. This is what policy really needs to do. So in the midst of this crisis, we recognize that we need access across the world to vaccines, to treatments, to diagnostics. All of that is critical to save lives now and really for the years to come. But what is even more essential, also vital as a basic building block, is healthy foods. Healthy foods. Remember, throughout the pandemic, what did we do? We ate more fruits and vegetables, right? So, you know, those of us who were vegetarians or vegans had a head start, right? But others of us are learning. We've got to eat more healthy foods and make sure that children in their first 1,000 days from birth to 2, that they have access to healthy foods. And also that women, particularly women who are pregnant and lactating, that they have access to healthy foods. This is the real way to sustain life throughout this pandemic and throughout future pandemics. So we can talk a lot about, you know, making sure that vaccines are available globally, and we must fight for vaccine equity around the world. We must fight to make sure that Black, Brown, Indigenous communities have access to those life-saving treatments. And then we don't, you know, wait a decade as we did with the AIDS crisis. We have to understand the lessons as we go along, learn those lessons. Most important lesson, that all on this planet, everyone in our human family, have access to healthy foods, have access to land to grow the healthy foods, have access to seeds that are traditional seeds, not dependent on GMOs, that these building blocks will build up healthy societies for the future, will also sustain our planet for the future. So lots there, but I think the pandemics teach us that if we care for all of us in our human family, we will be able to ensure that not only this generation, but 7 generations down and beyond will also be able to survive and thrive on this planet we call home.
Thank you so much. Really, there is a lot there, but I'll be honest, I feel like we could have this conversation for a few more hours. I know I would really enjoy learning and listening, but we do have to wrap up our time here. And so, Asma, I want to just give you a softball question to just crush it out of the park, but I think it's an important one. Given all that we've heard and all that you know, and you've been pouring your life into this for many, many years, what is it that we should want the US government to do to make a better 1,000 days for women and children around the world? What's our big ask?
Thanks, Eugene. We should actually be quite proud. The US government on nutrition has done a lot over the years. The evidence that I mentioned and that was in the Lancet really came from research that was funded by the US government. So the US government did help build that evidence base that now we can take action on. And the US Agency for International Development over the last 10 years has done a lot to support the scaling up nutrition movement, has developed its own multi-sectoral nutrition strategy, and now has the first ever chief nutritionist for the first time. So it is in a very strong position. But as Emira said, and this COVID crisis has really exacerbated hunger, and for the first time in many years, malnutrition is on the rise. And both a severe acute malnutrition, the type that kills, but then also the stunting that has the long-term impact. And what we've learned is, and again, as Emira said, nutrition can't wait. It has to be part and parcel and at the center of the COVID response and at the COVID recovery because of the long-term impact. Nutrition helps build immunity. So as we think about future pandemics, or even protecting people from future variants, good nutrition helps strengthen our immunity. The US government is in a strong position to lead because of its history, because of its relationships. And so what I would love to see in this year which is crucial on so many levels. First of all, there's the COVID recovery, but then there's also the UN Food Systems Summit that's coming up in September. There's the climate conference that's coming up in November. And then there's the Nutrition for Growth conference that will be hosted by the government of Japan in December. There are several really important opportunities this year for US leadership and to galvanize others to make the investments in nutrition. And we know that when the United States makes a commitment, makes a financial commitment, makes a policy commitment, others also join in and support that. So our resources, the funding that we provide, leverages additional resources from other parts of the world. And the countries that we're talking about, many of the Sun countries, COVID has had a devastating impact on their economies. They cannot do this by themselves. They need support right now to be able to invest in nutrition. As I mentioned, the Scaling Up Nutrition movement is moving into the third phase and really putting countries in the driver's seat. They will need the financial support, the policy support, the technical assistance, the capacity strengthening, and the US government is really poised to be able to deliver that. And I think, what we've seen over the years is strong bipartisan support, both Republicans and Democrats who really understand the value of this. But in this year, where there are a lot of competing interests, we need BREAD members to say nutrition cannot wait. We have to invest in nutrition now. Otherwise, we pay the price down the road. I think that's the piece that people really need to fully internalize. Nutrition is prevention. It's prevention of poor health outcomes, prevention of poor education outcomes, prevention of inequality down the road, because incomes, if you are well nourished, you're much more likely to have a better job and earn more. So nutrition is foundational, it's prevention, and it cannot wait. We have to invest in nutrition this year. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Folks that are watching live or later on video, I think it's pretty clear. We are so blessed at Bread for the World to not only have excellent staff, but also an incredible extended Bread family, a network of partners that are wanting to get in good trouble together, wanting to pursue justice together, wanting to pursue the common good, human flourishing, that we believe loving our neighbors is, yes, going across the street from our home, but also to Liberia, to Sri Lanka, to India, and beyond. Again, please, thank you, Asma, Emira, so much for sharing with us today. Your conviction, your passion, your personal stories. You have invested in Bread for the World and our members, and we are very indebted to you. And thank you to all of you who have joined us today for the Advocacy Summit. And here's one last exhortation. Please don't go away. We are going to be having a keynote address from Shane Claiborne coming up next. Thank you again so much. Blessings, and we'll see you very soon.